I've made the argument and have supported a position held by Professor Stephen Calabrese that the appointment in specific of this special counsel, Robert Mueller's unconstitutional violation of the Appointments Clause. And there was a Supreme Court decision in 1988 which upheld the independent counsel statute with one dissenting justice, Justice Scalia, where Congress set up this statutory position of an independent counsel. And it had a lot of very odd aspects to it. And the biggest problem was we have three branches of government. We also have this fourth administrative state that is not sanctioned by the Constitution, but exists out of necessity, and it has been completely politicized and is utterly out of control. And then we had the independent counsel statute, but that lapsed because both Democrats and Republicans determined that it was a disaster. And it was an additional branch of the federal government, if you will, with absolutely no historical basis or foundation. And so that lapsed, but now we have what's called a regulatory special counsel with certain rules that are in place for the appointment of such a special counsel. Robert Mueller is a special counsel. Robert Mueller's appointment was in violation of the very regulation that created this. That is, as you know, if you listen to this program, any time in the last, God knows what, 18 months or so, since he was appointed, that it lacked any criminal statutory basis for the appointment. You can't just appoint a prosecutor to investigate people and to investigate things. And there was no criminal basis for any prosecutor, let alone a special prosecutor. Mr. Rosenstein appointed his friend, Mr. Mueller, his first boss when he was holding his first permanent position at the Department of Justice. And he appointed Mr. Mueller, who was best friends with Mr. Comey. Mr. Comey brags about the fact that he did what he did in terms of his leak and so forth in order to encourage the appointment of a special counsel. So it's all very neat, all very clever, but also all very improper. In addition, Mr. Mueller's agenda, that is, his assignment, is very broad and gets broader by the day. And even though there is oversight of some sort in the Office of the Deputy Attorney General as the acting Attorney General, just as there is with an Assistant Attorney General or a U.S. Attorney or so forth, the difference is an Assistant Attorney General and a United States Attorney has to be nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The Appointments Clause of the Constitution. It requires that when you're appointing principal people to the executive branch, that the Senate has a role. The Senate has a role. And that's why a cabinet secretary, a sub-cabinet secretary, third and fourth tier cabinet secretaries all have to go through this process. Mr. Mueller did not. And what they're arguing is the case 30 years ago, Morrison v. Olson, that would be Ted Olson, independent counsel Morrison, that the Supreme Court ruled overwhelmingly that that position is constitutional, and it laid out the elements that needed to be met in order to have such a constitutional appointment. The problem here is there's one gaping hole. Mr. Mueller's responsibilities are akin to the United States Attorney in every district in the country. He even has 17 prosecutors under him and scores of FBI agents. He's running if you will, a United States Attorney's office, except they call him special counsel. It's a difference in name only. U.S. attorneys have oversight, not unlike Mr. Mueller's oversight. That is, if they're going to take on certain major political and national issues, they need approval from Main Justice, just as Mr. Mueller does. So, in many respects, Mr. Mueller is akin to a United States attorney who must be nominated by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate. But Mr. Mueller hasn't been nominated by anybody or confirmed by anybody. We now have 3 different district court decisions. 3, all in Washington, D.C., that take the position that Mueller's appointment is constitutional. It just shows you the extent to which law and order and the rule of law have collapsed. You saw it with the FISA court, where you have federal district judges sitting in secret. You don't even know which one sat when unless you can put the dots together. They don't even have to reveal themselves. In this secret court that was created in 1979, as I recall, so that the government could, at least theoretically in good faith, make the case in counterintelligence matters related to national security in front of a federal judge to ensure that a warrant might issue if there's probable cause that an individual is a foreign agent working, in essence, for a foreign government. The process is broken. That's not what happened in the election. That's not what happened. Mr. Stroke was involved. Sarah Carter has a wonderful piece from early this morning or yesterday in which she said she believes that Stroke was actually involved in the application process. I don't doubt it for a minute, given his hand is in everything. Now, what does this have to do with Mr. Mueller? So, individuals with standing in court are challenging the constitutionality of his appointment, and in 3 cases, they lost. That's not the final word. You can go to an appeals court and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court if they'll take it up. This is not the independent counsel statute, I would tell these justices. You have a regulatory special counsel who has enormous power. Now, how do we know he has this enormous power? You know what he's investigating now? He's investigating the aid to Roger Stone and Roger Stone. Now, Roger Stone is a moron. Roger Stone and I have clashed. Roger Stone has written defamatory things about me. But that's irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. I'm talking about the rule of law now. And his associate, this fellow by the name of Mueller, I don't know these people. I don't know them. I've never met them. I've never talked to them. And so I'm just looking at this as an analyst, as objectively as I can, as a constitutional conservative who believes in a constitutional republic. It's really quite amazing that despite all of this, that Mueller's in the Eastern District of Virginia, prosecuting Manafort on matters that apply to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia, that he's looking at Roger Stone and a Roger Stone associate, that he's looking at a call woman in Manhattan, and perhaps in relation to Roger Stone, who's a bit player, if a player at all. He's all over the field, is Mueller. And yet these federal judges refuse to uphold the Constitution. They refuse to do it. But I wanted to make you aware of this. And now in the Mueller trial, as you probably heard, today the defense rested. They didn't call a single witness. They didn't call Manafort, which is a good idea because his words could be twisted by a prosecutor. But in any event, they didn't call a single witness. I hope that was the right decision, because my eyebrows went up and my ears perked when I heard that and read that. I hope that's the right decision. They must think they have a pretty solid case that the prosecution didn't make their case. Maybe they do. There's also going to be another trial in Washington, D.C. So Manafort will be tried there. Typically, or often I should say, cases like this are combined so there's one jurisdiction, but Mueller has as his purpose to make everything as difficult and painful for Manafort as possible. Look, innocent or guilty, he's still an American citizen. Let me tell you the irony of this. We have people who had a compound and have one in New Mexico where a 3-year-old baby died, where there were weapons, where the individuals involved are a grave danger to this country, where they were allegedly, I underscore that, training some children to use weapons, reportedly and potentially in schools. They are free today. I believe the bail amount was $20,000. They're free today. Your Paul Manafort, who for the last several months has served in a federal prison in solitary confinement, who hasn't been convicted of anything, and the charges against him all relate to non-violent allegations with no past history of legal violations. Nobody's died. He's not threatening anybody. He's not training children to do anything. And yet he has served time in prison without being convicted of anything because the prosecution told a Obama-appointed judge, a leftist in Washington, D.C., that he was trying to talk to witnesses or trying to talk to other people and so forth and so on. Now, they didn't prove their case. These are allegations that the judge considered compelling and persuasive. So I just wanted to point that out. So that's the Manafort case. Mueller's chasing all over the world. He's been all over the world, as people have, chasing down leads, any lead they can think of, that involve Russians. Russians. And let me circle back to the beginning of the program this evening. This entire Russia stuff involving the Trump campaign was a pseudo-event, a phony issue, planted by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC through the dossier, executed by Obama officials at the FBI and elsewhere, given voice and support by the media, the free press, the pseudo-media. And that's how we got here, and that's why the president's furious. So people who sit back on their butts with microphones in their face or cameras in their face saying, the president might not want to react this way. The president may not want to tweet this way. I've been involved in cases like this where people have been set up or the liberty and livelihood of individuals have been on the line. I was a lawyer in the Iran-Contra case, defending the former Attorney General of the United States, Ed Meese, and the outrageous lies that were held in his direction by an independent counsel, for which he was always innocent and for which he was never charged. And we went through that, as did other individuals, for 7.5 to 8 years. I watched as Caspar Weinberger was indicted on phony charges in horror. I watched as a prosecutor went after the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, and believed he should have been impeached. I was involved in these Star Chamber proceedings under the Independent Counsel Act, where I spent 2.5 months in a vault, in a room, in the basement of the Department of Justice, having to read into a microphone, because I wasn't allowed to transcribe the information, grand jury testimony that Mr. Walsh, the independent counsel, was free to put in his report that would go public, but I was not free to transcribe to share with my client. I've seen these Star Chamber proceedings before. And luckily, we fought like hell and we won. But the damage was done when they put out their report and try to influence history. If Lawrence Walsh and the Iran-Contra matter and his investigation, if he had had his way, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, George Shultz, Caspar Weinberger, Ed Meese, all of them would have been guilty of some nonsense. And they were guilty of nothing. Nothing. And so when I sit here with my own experience as a lawyer who's been in these battles, and I watch what Robert Mueller is doing, I am disgusted. I know what he's doing. I know what his prosecutors are doing. I know what his investigators are doing. I know what these judges are doing. And it's a damn shame. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.